have to amend the rules, will they?
You can't say girls can have their hair longer than the collar, but boys can't. That's unlawful.
No. So if you'd answer the question, your belief is then that every school in the land will have to change its rules on this?
They all need to look. I'm mixed race myself. I was sent home from school for having my hair, in fact, my hair shoulder length when I was at school.
Yeah.
And my father went down and went absolutely mad at them. And then they said, okay, she can have it tied back. Whereas other white girls had much longer hair and they had their hair tied back. That was a long time ago, 40 years ago. And they still haven't really
My
had
question was,
conversation.
you honestly think that every school now will, because I don't think it will, do you?
Well, I do, because every employer does.
Okay. Well, let's see. I don't think it'll be while I'm still in this game that every school in the United Kingdom will change its rules to allow all boys to wear their hair exactly the same as girls or whatever. I don't see that day coming. Julie, thank you for that. I did mention the fact we try and get an update on what we heard or what you have been hearing on Hero News Bulletins from the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt. It was pretty well trailed this morning. LBC's political editor Natasha Clark was with the Chancellor this morning. What have you learnt, Natasha? Morning.
Good morning, Nick. Yes, Jeremy Hunt has promised that the Tories will continue to cut taxes if they win next election, and even beforehand if he can. Now, he's been defending the Conservatives' record this morning. He says that there's been 14 years of Conservative government. They have had to take difficult decisions which have borne fruit with more jobs, investment and growth, but he did admit that growth has been less than he would have wanted. He blamed the global pandemic, energy crisis around the world, but he also used his speech, Nick, to hit out at the Labour Party for their tax record, and he says that under Labour and under their tax plans, it means that taxes would go up, but he promised that under the Conservatives, taxes would continue to be cut.
And we're not stopping there. If we can afford to go further, responsibly, to reduce the double tax on work this autumn, that is what I will do. Because over time, we make no apology for wanting to keep cutting the double tax on work until it's gone. But only when we could do so without increasing borrowing and without cutting funding for public services or pensions.
He said that the tax row at the moment going on in British politics is the biggest divide between the two parties about what happens to that tax burden next. And he did admit in a Q&A at the end that obviously the Conservatives have had to put up taxes. He said that was because of paying for things like the big furlough scheme and there's energy price guarantee that the government bailed out a couple of years ago. But yes, like I said, he managed to mostly spend his speech taking aim at Angela Rayner's workers' rights reforms. He said they would be an unmitigated tragedy for the economy.
Let's start with jobs. The president of the CBI described the UK as a job-creating factory. That's because over the last 14 years we have painstakingly built one of the most flexible labour markets in Europe. But Angela Rayner wants 17 new burdens on employers, which would turn that job-creating factory into a French-style, inflexible labour market. Now, it may sound good to offer full employment rights from day one, and certainly pleases the unions. But if the impact is fewer new jobs, then the impact on young people and families up and down the country will be an unmitigated tragedy.
He said that taxes will go up under a Labour government. He accused the party of having a £38 billion unfunded black hole in their spending plans, but Labour have hit back, saying it's another desperate attempt by the Tories to deflect from their own £46 billion unfunded tax ban that they say could lead to higher borrowing. He said there was a clear choice at the next election between the two parties, but look, I think, Nick, after this, I think voters are going to be very confused about which party is going to be putting up their taxes from the next election and which will be bringing them down.
LBC's political editor Natasha Clark reporting. I'm sure we'll hear more from Natasha in the news bulletins and with some of my colleagues. Look, apologies to Sarah, to Susan, to Tandy and others. We're about done. All want to be talking about that young man's haircut, but we are done for another day. But let's stay with money. The conversation we've just been having about the Chancellor's speech And of course, so much to do with growth, so much to do with interest rates. Well, next week you'll have the exclusive opportunity to put your calls to Andy Haldane. He's the chief economist at the Bank of England. It's fair to say he's been outspoken about the policy employed by the current government of the Bank of England. Here he is speaking earlier in the year about the bank to have cut those rates sooner.
They'll be cutting rates now, but it would have been from the tail end of last year. I think at that point we knew that inflation, although still a bit too high, was coming down, and the essence of monetary policy is to look ahead, not to where inflation is, but to where inflation will be.
Yeah, the widely respected Andy Haldane, former chief economist of the Bank of England, taking your calls next week. If you missed today's show, listen back or catch up on Global Player. That's the official LBC app where you can also pause and rewind like radio. Download now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. That's me for a week. James O'Brien's the other side of the news on LBC. I'll be with you Monday morning from 7. Meantime, have a safe weekend.
Thank you very much indeed, Nick. The time is approaching 10 o'clock, and good morning to Paul, who's first out of the blocks in my inbox. Get that hunt off the radio, he writes. Morning, James. Have a great show. Well, I will do my best, Paul. We begin with some good news. Britain has finally become world-beating by at least one international measure. The bad news is that its homelessness will look not just at the why, but also at the what. And later in the programme, just 8% of positions in the creative industries are now occupied by people who would describe themselves as working class. Why does that matter, and what does it mean? You know, it is one of my favourite subjects. But we begin with an almost reluctant turn to Ukraine, where the situation is, it's getting pretty dire.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 10 o'clock, Jeremy Hunt has described Labour's economic plans as a lie, accusing the party of spreading fake news. The Chancellor, who's been speaking in Westminster this morning, has promised to cut taxes if the Tories win the election. He's claimed a Labour victory would hurt every family in the country. The gap between what they will spend and what they will raise, according to these independent official costings, is £38 billion, or £2,100 per working household. Keir Starmer's first step will not be the motherhood apple pie we heard yesterday, but to help himself to you and your family's wants. Labour has described the speech as desperate, insisting all of its policies are fully costed and fully funded. President Putin has described the partnership between Moscow and Beijing as inseparable. The Russian leader's been speaking on a state visit to China as his forces press ahead with an assault in northern Ukraine. Residents of Kharkiv faced a 16-hour air raid alert last night. Lee Reaney, a journalist in Lviv, says Russia doesn't have the capability to occupy the area.
What they are doing and what their aim is to get closer to Kharkiv city so that they can use artillery to pound the city as opposed to the expensive missiles that they're using right now. And I believe the aim there is to just make life so difficult for the people of Kharkiv that they leave.
An armed suspect has been shot dead after trying to set fire to a synagogue in northern France. Police say he approached officers with a knife and a metal bar in the city of Rouen early this morning. The attack caused significant damage to the building. A damaged air valve has been identified as the possible source of a parasite in the water supply in South Devon. Thousands of households in the Brixham area have been told to boil their tap water to kill the Cryptosporidium. It's believed cattle manure caused the contamination. And it's been confirmed Brazil will host the Women's World Cup in 2027. Brazil's bid saw off a joint proposal from Belgium, Germany and the Netherlands in a FIFA vote this morning. In the city, the FTSE 100 a short time ago was down 30 points at 84.07. Pound buys €1.16 and $1.26. LGC weather. Any mist clearing now to leave a mixture of sunny spells and showers. They will be quite heavy with the risk of thunder in parts of Scotland, a high of 22 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC. I'm Thomas White.
At Tesco Mobile, we're putting your contract price on ice. Right now, save £288 on the epic Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra, powered by AI with 12 gigs of data, for just $49.99 a month with club card prices. And it will stay that price for your whole contract. That's value frozen in. It pays to be connected. Search Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
End 19th of May. Club card and 36 month British payment required. Frozen for contract duration. Terms at tescomobile.com/terms.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. It's 4 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. One of the things that I puzzle over quite a lot is the frequency with which you can return to the same territory. I say you, I mean we. The frequency with which we can return to the same territory. It's only really happened twice in all the time that we've been spending our mornings together, that it has felt normal and natural to return to the same territory almost every day. The most obvious one, of course, was COVID, when it actually felt inappropriate for months to talk about anything else. And the mind was certainly focused by the fact that I was often presenting the programme from a shed at the bottom of a glorified shed, at the bottom of my garden. The idea of doing a phone-in about anything else in those sort of circumstances just seemed weird, when the reasons why you were listening to me broadcast from a shed at the bottom of my garden were essentially the only story in town. And the other one, which was a slightly more personal perspective, was Brexit, of course. Because there were so few outlets that were telling you the truth, or giving you the facts that you needed to have to develop, however you voted in 2016, or post-2016, to develop informed opinions about what was actually going on, which I think is why people who were listening to this programme at that time would be the least shocked and surprised in the country by the absolute mess that has subsequently transpired. But war should be on that list, shouldn't it? I mean, obviously, wars in which we are engaged would be. I was still at school when the Falklands needed defending from the Argentinian invasion, but I imagine, there will be people listening to the programme now who can remember listening to LBC during the Falklands conflict. I presume it was the great Bob Holness and Douglas Cameron presenting the breakfast show at the time, and Brian Hayes in this slot. But I imagine that the Falklands would have demanded attention pretty much every day, wouldn't it? If British troops were engaged on the ground, you would feel a little odd drawing attention to anything else. Maybe not 3 hours a day in the way that it was during COVID, but certainly, most days in the way that it was post-Brexit. And yet, in the last 6 months, we have clearly, on this programme and indeed in the UK media, we've done a lot more on the unfolding situation in Gaza, continuing farming inflicted upon Palestinian people by Benjamin Netanyahu's government and the Israeli Defence Force than we have upon the situation in Ukraine, which, and I don't want to turn it into a sort of trite game of top trumps, but I think, well, it is a nuanced debate, but for me, at least, at this point in the proceedings, attack alert, sirens ringing out across the city, and a sense that the massing of Russian troops has changed the game. And this was entirely predictable. That's one of the oddest things about it. Even armchair observers on newspaper rights today publicly predicted an assault on Kharkiv. We even knew the units that would be involved. you're interested in such things, the 11th and 44th Army Corps and possibly the 138th Separate Motorised Rifle Brigade of the 6th Army. And I heard on the radio this morning, I heard a question that I haven't heard asked yet, and it sent a bit of a shiver down my spine. The question was, as you might have already predicted, or as you might even expect, what if Putin wins? Now, in the immediate aftermath of the invasion of Ukraine, there was an almost upbeat air of celebration at how badly the Russians had calculated. You know, the army marching up what was essentially the main road, the sort of equivalent of the M40 coming smack into the middle of Kyiv, just thinking that they would be able to waltz in unmolested and essentially take over, which of course they have done in other areas. And it failed miserably. They are realistic reports that they thought it would all be over in 2 days, that Ukraine would sort of crumble like a wet cardboard box, and Volodymyr Zelensky would either be, either his days would end in unpleasant fashion, or he'd be fleeing for exile elsewhere in the world. And they got that completely wrong. And the pictures of ordnance vehicles with wheels missing, epic evidence everywhere of failure, stories of the troops themselves being supremely ill-equipped for the task that they've been given. And then the detailed reporting of the toing and froing. The more Ukraine seems to be defying the odds and repelling the Russians, the more perhaps, and I'm conscious of a little bit of guilt or shame here, embarrassment, I think is probably the best word, the more perhaps the Western media enjoyed reporting it, and the more complicated it got, lurching ultimately into the balance or the pendulum swinging in Russia's direction, the harder it became to cover. You can do war reporting if it is, quotes, good news, end quotes, but if it's bad news, it becomes a different proposition entirely. And then, of course, the problems in Congress that Joe Biden faced in getting aid into the region, the simple calculations, the simple mathematics of running out of shells. You know, people telling us, Peter Ruddick, our great friend in the Ukrainian parliament, appearing on the program regularly to beg Western governments, as Bill Browder was doing on this show yesterday, to free up some of the frozen Russian assets held in British bank accounts and just give the money to the Ukrainians so they can actually buy the stuff that they need. Because the idea of actually running out of ammunition, not having the shells to put in the ordnance to launch at the drones or to fire at enemy positions is extraordinary. What's happening now is that Russia is testing Ukraine along the entire length of the 800-mile front line. You know, the army has changed. The best analysis I have involved the explanation of how the army has learned its lessons, the slightly ragtag-seeming shambles that seem to typify Russian forces in the early days of this conflict, as I said, has been replaced by people who know what they're doing. Tobias Ellwood tried to draw attention to something really interesting earlier this week, and on Twitter, sadly his serious point got buried under a barrage of mockery that he used a photoshopped picture of the new head of the military, but the new head of the military doesn't have much of a military background. He's essentially an economist, showing that Putin is now prioritising a sort of military procurement over almost anything else, ensuring that his army is equipped to the teeth with the sort of arms and ordnance that it needs to inflict the unimaginable on Ukraine. And it is the unimaginable to which we turn our attention this morning. I don't know the answer to this question. Nobody does. The warning from the earliest days, even perhaps from the invasion of Crimea when David Cameron was Prime Minister, his inaction during that period, of course, latterly rewarded by promotion to Foreign Secretary by Rishi Sunak. But the sense that if Putin succeeds, he does not stop. I'm always reminded, in several contexts, not just this one, of the failure, the foolishness of thinking that some appetites can be sated I think history is dotted with examples of well-meaning politicians and diplomats thinking that non-well-meaning politicians and diplomats can somehow be sated, that there is, if you like, a limit to their ambition. I guess most obviously we'd think in this country of Neville Chamberlain coming back from Munich, waving that piece of paper around and completely underestimating the toxicity and extent of Hitler's ambitions. But the idea that you can placate or sate somebody possessed of dictatorial ambition or imperial ambition is a lesson we never seem to learn from history. So, in the spirit of ambition and in the spirit of having enormous faith in the quality of contributors to the programme that I present, have a crack at that for me. I guess if you live in places, or rather if you have, well, no, you could be living there, of course you could. Obviously, which is all corners of the planet these days. But if you have family in or you hail from Latvia or Estonia or Finland, you're going to have this question a lot closer to the surface of your thinking than the rest of us do. But what happens if Putin wins? 0345 6060 973. And I'd also like you to start ringing in on that now, by the way, because I don't want to inflict any more of my slightly amateurish analysis on you after the next junction. But the other element of the conversation is about what the West has done. Do we know what the West has done? Do we have a full... Actually, I can make a blithe observation about Joe Biden struggling to get the aid through Congress because of various conflicting, self-interested positions being adopted by various American politicians. But do you want to have a crack at answering why we haven't done more? Why the United Kingdom hasn't done more? Boris Johnson, who I did warn you at the time can't be trusted as far as you could throw him, made great play about what a stalwart supporter of Ukraine he was. But I mean, looking at the situation now, I don't think we can claim in the last 6 months to have been of particular use. Other countries way ahead of us on the question of supply and support. So there will also be people listening to this programme, and I'm very conscious of this. There'll be quite a lot of people listening to this programme who are Ukrainian, either here as a consequence of the war or here before the war even started. There will also be people listening to this programme who have stepped up to the plate and sheltered Ukrainian refugees during the unfolding crisis, and they perhaps, both of those categories, will have had this conversation a lot closer to the forefront of their minds than most of us have. So whatever your perspective on this, whatever your experience, I want to know your answer to the question of what happens if Putin wins. And as a secondary supplementary question, why haven't we, the UK, and the answer might simply be that we just don't have that heft anymore. We just don't matter like we used to, however hard some people try to pretend that we do. We've denuded and diluted our power on the world stage by a variety of decisions taken over the last few years, most obviously Brexit, I suppose. But if the answer to the question of why we haven't done more is because we can't, then that is important to hear as well, isn't it? It is 16 minutes after 10. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. What happens if Putin wins? And why haven't we done more? We keep hearing about the importance of maintaining our status as a world power. Rishi Sunak on Wednesday was trying to sort of goad Keir Starmer over being less effective in the arena of defence, and yet as some people see as a tinderbox that could spark World War III swings in the direction of our sworn enemies, we don't seem to have done much at all. 0345 6060 973. It's 10:17.
LBC. Matthew Wright, weekends from 7 a.m.
King Charles was taking money from dead people that lived on his estate and spending it improving royal palaces.
I'm happy to do it because I know where my money's going.
But you don't.
Just tell me, where do you think the money's going? Who would be accountable?
There wouldn't be any money because there wouldn't be any royal family. There wouldn't be any royal family accountable in any shape or form.
Matthew
towards anyone that wants to come here, and we just want to create a really nice space to come to, basically.
Especially because people often read me as like a cis man or like, you know, straight guy or whatever. Like, I just don't want to have to go and answer a million questions about why I am where I am or friends with people I am. You know, I just don't really understand it.
Is that important to have a space where you're not being questioned when you go in? Like, it's just, you're there?
Yeah, especially like in a bar space, it's a place to come and like relax. It's not such a political sphere. I think it's important to have these spaces that are kind of break from that.
It was going to those kinds of spaces when I was younger that helped me kind of figure out my sexuality and my identity, and I know that's been super important for loads of people in terms of just having those spaces to go to and to be around people that are like your community and that are like you, but also just having a space where you know that you're safe and that your community can come together and just like chill out and have a nice time. And it's not really that deep, it's just like a really nice space to be, and that's what we want to create. I think that's really important.
So, my name's Jess, I'm a butch lesbian and I run Dirt Nights.
How would you describe Dirt Nights?
We run cabarets, we run club nights, and we run pop-up bar takeovers that are exclusively for people of marginalised genders.
I wanted to ask about the name as well, because dyke is a word that some people find offensive. So why did you choose it for your events?
I think there's a long history in the queer community of people reclaiming words and reclaiming languages. I think a lot of people don't get it, but as queer people, reclaiming that language, if it's something that you feel comfortable to do, is really important. As a butch woman, I would be like going out and find myself in a lot of very unsafe situations, and I really, really needed a space that was for people like me. And I was wondering, why is no one doing this? There's such a need for this.
Did you feel like it was important to have something up north in Leeds?
I could see those spaces happening down in London, and I wasn't aware of anything from the north that was similar at all. So it felt really, really silly not to just set one up north and do it myself and provide a space for Northern Bikes.
Could you tell me where we are at the moment?
Yeah, we're in quite a fabulous dressing room backstage. Current home of Butch Please. Hi, my name's Tabs. I run Club Night Butch Please for lesbian, trans and queer people in celebration of all degrees of butch. If we don't keep these spaces for ourselves, what have we got? Straight people can go out to all the other bars and clubs, but Butch Please is one night a month, and that's our space and our time, and I do think it's important that we keep it for ourselves so that we can feel free and relaxed. Queer women particularly, we don't get to express our sexuality in the world, so to come to a space where it's okay to express our sexuality, I think is incredibly powerful.
I would love some.
Oh, Maryville, song of your shirt, you button down boy, you thick rod of irony. Oh, Maryville, you sawn off miniskirt, you tights torn into choir. Oh, Maryville, oh, swagger, oh, keychain and denim. My name's Joel Taylor, I'm a poet and author. It's a section from my poem called Psalm, actually. My book that looks like lesbian counterculture, particularly butch counterculture in the late 80s and 90s.
How would you describe the lesbian scene in the UK at the moment?
This is great.
Is it? I mean, in some way, we could have had this conversation in 2014, couldn't? And he invaded the Crimean Peninsula with the West sat on their hands, and he consolidated his position, and then, you know, 8 years later, he set his sights on the rest of Ukraine. Is it the case that Westerners sort of prevaricate because they don't go far enough to provoke a response, and then he actually turns the dial up incrementally and ends up doing something that if he did it on day one would provoke a response?
I think perhaps the opposite, James.
Yeah, I do as well. I've said it out loud, because if he'd taken Kyiv in 2 days, he wouldn't have stopped there, would he?
No, but I think also there's this sort of this phrase in the "don't poke the bear." There's this sort of, you know, this Russian bear that's sleeping, and if you poke it, that's it, you're done for. And so I suspect with Trump it's a case of, look, fine, let's just let him have Crimea. he'll leave it at that. We don't want to provoke him. And I think that was the mistake.
And finally, George, why have we done... you can, of course, dispute the description that I'm about to apply, but why have we done so little?
I think we're scared. I think our politicians are scared. And my brother's on the right of politics as well, but we disagree on this fundamentally. He thinks we should just let him take part of Ukraine, sign a deal, make sure that deal says no more. He thinks essentially...
Has your brother heard of Neville Chamberlain?
I've said that to him. He thinks that it's start on nuclear war. That's what he thinks.
Well, it's funny you mentioned nuclear war. It's not the first text, but a text that came in just while you were talking. Thank you, George. Because your lack of understanding, this is directed at me, of the Ukrainian war and your peddling for a nuclear war is breathtaking, which is it's an interesting contribution, but not one I fully understand, but perhaps proves your point for you. Thank you, George. 0345 606 073 is the number you need. I wonder whether, I mean, as George and I have kind of demonstrated, trying to answer the question of what happens if Putin wins is an exercise in theoretics. But the question of why we've done so little may be even more interesting the longer the conversation goes on. What it tells us about our status in 2024, what it tells us about the domestic situation in this country, and perhaps the myth of military might, albeit statistically we still matter, we don't perhaps matter enough. Gordon's in Kings Lynn. Gordon, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Again, first-time caller. And,
welcome, Gordon.
Thank you. I returned from Ukraine on Sunday, having spent two weeks out there.
Gosh. How lucky for me you had your radio on this morning.
It is. I run a project whereby we supply vehicles and equipment to the Ukrainian armed forces on the front line. Right. It's a small project. We've delivered 8 Land Rovers. We delivered vehicles 78 full of equipment and supplies last week. And I was in Kharkiv the day before the Russians came over the border, and then we went down to Izium and to Liman, which are very much on the front lines. And the conversations I were having were with troops on the front, and I've now got quite a few friends out there who are Ukrainian men and women who are fighting, volunteer fighters on the front lines. Their general perception is that they fully understand that globally there are other events in the world which are taken off the front pages of the newspapers and out of the media. They understand what I really find frustrating, I think, is the lack of ongoing military and governmental support. We understand that the media is a fickle beast, but I think there is I think morale, out of all of the visits that I've done, I think on this occasion morale was probably at its lowest. There are many units that have plenty of Western weapons and ammunition and are indeed planning offensives. But there are also many units who are not doing so well and are suffering from lack of ammunition and do feel that they are... I think their perception is that they're losing a lot of compatriots, a lot of brothers and sisters, essentially because the West has failed to provide the weapons which they promised.
What does I mean, that's absolutely fascinating. On all sorts of levels. Even you were fascinating, Gordon. I don't want to use up all the time before the junction on you, as opposed to what you've just told me. But what's your back? How did you get involved in something as serious, if you like, but also as potentially hazardous as delivering equipment to Ukrainian troops?
It was nothing more than when the war first started, there was an appeal for some medicines to be delivered to the Ukrainian consulate in Poland. I did 5 or 6 trips to Poland in my own sort of vehicle, my Land Rover, filled it up with kit and equipment and took it over. But during that process I met, and it was in the very early stages of the war, I met lots of young men, not just young men, but older men who were saying goodbye to wives, girlfriends, mums, dads, daughters and sons, and they were getting into minibuses and literally hacking their way to Kyiv to the front to be handed AK-47s to take part in the defence of Kyiv.
And you've kept in touch with them, effectively?
Well, it was that sense of they had no equipment. There was young guys in tracksuits and baseball caps getting into minibuses and heading to the front. They had no protective equipment, they had nothing. So it was during that trip, or that last trip that I did with the medicines, that I decided that we needed to do more, so hence started a small project.
You're amazing. That's incredible. And it gives you these insights, these perspectives that obviously are not very pleasant at the moment, because from what you've just said, this is the lowest morale has ever been, and you describe also that attitude has gone, hasn't it? The idea of all hands to the pump, I'm rushing to the front in my tracksuit and baseball cap, that now it's conscription has risen and there's a struggle to bring people back that will bring people in. But you describe morale being at an all-time, and crucially perhaps for this conversation, a sense even of betrayal by the West?
Yes, I would say that there is, to a degree. I would also say that there's also a huge sort of chasm opening up in Ukraine society, which I've never seen before. So when you're on the front, and when you're in towns like Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Izium, Liman, I mean, Liman is a city, say the size of King's Lynn, where the only thing that lives there are rats and dogs. Everything has been destroyed, everything. And you live with the constant rolling thunder of artillery in the background. It's a permanent backdrop. But, you know, when in those places, it is, the way I describe it to people, it's a little bit like Mad Max. It's hard to describe. All you will see are troops, and every vehicle is painted NATO green, olive green, camouflaged, and every vehicle is pressed into service. Some of them have huge attachments on the front of them, battering rams. You see, it is literally like Mad Max. But then you take an 18-hour train journey to Lviv, which is on the west near the Polish border, and the town square is literally full. Every restaurant, every bar is full, and it is a serious, mind-bending experience.